Good evening and welcome to this forum on ballot question 1, additional tax on income over $1 million. This event is co-sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Boston and the League of Women Voters of Massachusetts. As we settle in, let me tell you about the League. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan grassroots organization working to protect and expand voting rights and ensure everyone is represented in our democracy. We empower voters and defend democracy through advocacy, education, and litigation at the local, state, and national levels. The League of Women Voters is a membership organization open to all people who subscribe to its purpose and policies. Women in the Name is a legacy that pays tribute to the veterans of the women's suffrage movement who were our founders over 100 years ago, and to the many females who inspire us all to make democracy work. I'm Robin Chen, Vice President of the Boston League of Women Voters, and I'll be providing brief introductions and an overview this evening. Our President, Carrie Costello, will moderate. We have Mr. Dan Sensi and Ms. Liz Speakman from the committees representing, respectively, the opponents and proponents of question 1. Our State League Executive Director, Patty Comfort, is handling your questions. Thank you to Karen Price and Bryn Gorman for providing technical assistance. Thank you for being here and for your engagement. If you would like to ask questions of our speakers for question 1, you are welcome to do so using the Q&A box. You may address your question to the pro or con speaker or both, but both speakers will have 1 minute to speak on the issue raised by the question. Although the League never endorses candidates or parties, it does, in some cases, endorse ballot questions. In order to take a stand for or against, the League must have a previously studied position, and if so, the board must vote whether to support or oppose each question. The League is taking no position on ballot question 1, 2, or 3, and has endorsed ballot question 4. Recordings of League events related to this year's ballot questions can be found on the State League's website, lwvma.org. As a reminder, here's the summary of question 1 that appears in the Red Book, on the Secretary of State's website, and on the ballot itself. Question 1 asks voters whether they approve of a proposed constitutional amendment that would establish an additional 4% state income tax on that portion of annual taxable income in excess of $1 million. This income level would be adjusted annually by the same method used for federal income tax brackets to reflect increases in the cost of living. Revenues from this tax would be used, subject to appropriation by the state legislature, for public education, public colleges and universities, and for the repair and maintenance of roads, bridges, and public transportation. The proposed amendment would apply to tax years beginning on or after January 1st, 2023. So, a yes vote would amend the state constitution to impose an additional 4% tax on that portion of incomes over $1 million to be used, subject to appropriation by the state legislature, on education and transportation. A no vote would make no change in the state constitution relative to income tax. State law requires a statement of fiscal impact on government finances by the Executive Office of Administration and Finance. The proposal increases the marginal tax rate on certain individual taxpayers by 80%. This change may increase annual state revenues by $1.2 billion in the near term, which is approximately 2.4% of the current annual state budget. However, annual revenue generated by the surtax will vary significantly and unpredictably from year to year. Additionally, numerous unpredictable factors could significantly alter the impact this proposal may have on state and municipal finances. For instance, taxpayers may decide to relocate their home or business to another state or adjust their filing status or timing of income realization to minimize their tax burden. The League has a strong position limiting the influence of money in politics. There is no limit to the amount of money that can be donated to ballot questions. We think it's important that voters are aware of the amount of money involved in the campaigns. As of reports filed on October 5th, both campaigns have raised more than $10 million, $10 million against and $19 million in favor. You can see who has donated to the campaigns at the State Office of Campaign and Political Finance website. Thank you for your attention. Now over to our moderator, Carrie.
Good evening. On behalf of the League of Women Voters, I will be this evening's moderator and timekeeper. And because we did not draw lottery or flip a coin for speaker. I will go with the tried and true. We'll go with the alphabetical order for opening remarks, and we will reverse it for closing remarks. So based on that, we're going to first welcome Dan Sensi from the Coalition to Stop the Tax Hike. He will have 5 minutes. I will give him a sign holding a lead pin when his time to stop is approaching, and the same for Liz. We will then move into questions. So Dan, welcome.
Carrie, thank you so much. And thank you to the League of Women Voters for the opportunity to be here tonight. On November 8th, the voters of Massachusetts will have a choice to make regarding one of the most significant tax hike proposals in the history of our Commonwealth. What would question 1 do? Question 1 proposes an amendment to the state constitution that would drastically change the structure of income taxes in the Commonwealth. It would capture tens of thousands of ordinary citizens, small business owners, homeowners, farmers, and retirees, half of whom only once in their lives. If passed, the measure would nearly double taxes immediately on any incomes of 1 million or more, from the current 5% to 9%. That is not a 4% increase, that is an 80% increase. Unlike federal taxes on personal income, the measure would tax one-time gains, such as those from selling a business or a home, as regular income. Many seniors and small business owners, few of which consider themselves millionaires, and are considered millionaires by you or me as well, would be caught by this question. People that have owned their homes or businesses for many years and are relying on decades of appreciation will be pushed into the highest tax bracket, nearly doubling their taxes, even if their yearly income is low. For the vast majority of Massachusetts residents, the equity in their home is their greatest asset. Today, 1 in 5 homes in Massachusetts will sell for over $1 million. This tax will rob the nest egg of hardworking residents across the Commonwealth. This tax hike amendment would provide Beacon Hill with a blank check to appropriate the funds as they choose. The measure is deceptive. It provides no guarantee that the new money from this huge tax increase would actually raise spending on education and transportation, despite claims. In fact, the Attorney General stated in 2018 that the language used in the measure would allow the legislature, quote, the legislature to choose to reduce funding in education and transportation from other sources and replace it with the new surtax revenue. And in 1992, voters passed a tax hike on tobacco, allegedly dedicated to smoking prevention and treatment programs. Roughly half of the funds went to non-tobacco related programs. The other half, where they saw fit. We have a massive budget surplus. This claims to solve a budget problem that does not exist. We have a giant budget surplus and historic revenue growth. In fiscal year 2021, the state collected $5 billion more from residents, workers, and businesses than it had projected. And the state still has an additional $4.8 billion in unspent federal COVID-19 relief funding, all of which lead to this massive surplus we see here today. It makes no sense to raise taxes on tens of thousands of small business owners and retirees when our Commonwealth's government and politicians have giant surpluses and tax revenues coming in well over projections. If passed, question 1 would be one of the state's highest ever increases at a time when our state already has the biggest surplus in history. The deceptive wording of the question leads voters into believing that this is uniquely a tax on uber wealthy individuals. Believe it, this is much more of a middle-class tax hike. The tax hike amendment would capture tens of thousands of ordinary people and nearly double the income tax rate on small business owners, homeowners, family farmers, retirees, and other Massachusetts residents. Proponents also falsely claim that the revenue generated from this tax will increase spending on education and transportation. Make no mistake, the revenue from this tax will give politicians a blank check with zero accountability. That is why our coalition, comprised of hundreds of individuals, retirees, homeowners, veterans, small business owners, large employers, and community organizations, have come together to communicate to the Commonwealth that now is not the time for this tax hike. Thank you, Kelly. Carrie.
Okay. Thank you. And you had a few seconds left. So
I yield my time.
To introduce Liz Speakman, who is Representative Regional Coordinator for the Fair Share Amendment. Liz, welcome.
Thank you so much, Carrie, and thank you so much to the League of Women Voters Boston and Massachusetts for hosting this forum. I'm so thrilled to be here. Wish we could be in person so we could kind of chat face to face and get to know each other. I believe in your mission. I think creating more access for voters, all of our voters across the state, is critical to having a democracy that really functions well. And I love what you're doing around accountability and transparency. So thank you so much. I feel humbled to be here. My name is Liz Speakman. I am a mom and a social worker, and I have joined the Fair Share campaign as something that I really believe in and feel like is going to shift things for our communities. I work, my regular job is domestic violence prevention. I've done that for a long time, and I felt so strongly about Fair Share as a mom that I decided to take a leave from my job and help out with the campaign. So I'm really happy to talk with you all about why I did that and why I feel like it's really going to support our communities. So as you heard, Fair Share is going to add a tax to the wealthy in order to help pay for education and transportation. So as you know, every dollar over $1 million will be subject to an additional 4% tax. And all of that money will in fact go to education and transportation. It's a constitutional amendment. And so there's no stronger way that our coalition could make sure that this funding actually goes to education and transportation. And we believe wholeheartedly that it will. There's certainly political will to ensure there's more revenue for education and transportation. There's no reason to believe that our political leaders would devote this money to anything other than those two causes. We've been in this coalition for many years trying to make sure there is additional revenue for education and transportation, and that's what we're fighting for. I've been knocking on doors since July. I live in Quincy and talking to my neighbors, and they have a lot of questions about whether this will affect them or not, and whether it's going to help our community. I have 2 little kids in the public school system, and I saw the impact of COVID on them and their friends and our neighbors. And I know that our public schools are doing everything they possibly can to support our students, but they simply don't have the resources they need in order to provide the specialty care that a lot of our kids need. We've seen significant learning loss, as well as incredibly high rates of depression and anxiety in our kids. And when they're feeling anxious and worried, they're not able to learn. And so we need more funding to provide those specialty supports around learning disabilities, social workers, guidance counselors. I believe that public schools are really the core of our communities. And when we invest in them, we all win. And we need to share, our values need to align with where we put our resources. And I believe that our values in Massachusetts are really about investing in our children, investing in our public education, making sure we have access to resources so that we have green climate, we have green public transit options, climate friendly options. And I agree with the League's mission around educational equity. When you ask someone, how are the schools in Massachusetts? The response is, well, it depends. It shouldn't depend. It shouldn't depend on where you live, how well your public education is. And so we are fiercely advocating for additional revenue for our education so we can create more justice and equity across our state, as well as environmentally friendly public transit options. I love when I get these questions from voters about home sales, about small businesses, about whether the money is going to go where it actually does. And when I get a chance to actually sit down and talk to voters about what I have come to learn about all those things, inevitably they say they're going to vote yes. We have a lot of work to do to clear up some of the misinformation that's out there. And I hope to have a chance tonight to talk with you more about that. My parents are small business owners, and I certainly would not be working as hard as I am if I thought or believed in any way that this new tax was going to affect them. They do pretty well with their revenue, but their personal income has never been close to $1 million a year. When they have revenue that comes in, it often goes right back out. With many small business owners, they have to pay their employees, their equipment, all the expenses that go with small business. And I often tell people, if your personal income is over $1 million a year, it's likely not a small business that you own, but a bigger business. I'm really excited to vote yes on one, and I hope we can get your support tonight, and look forward to hearing the questions that you have. Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, thank you. Well, both our panelists made right at almost the 5-minute mark. We're now going to move to questions, and each panelist will have 1 minute, whether again it's directed to one or the other, or if it's directed to both, certainly. So given the fact that Liz finished speaking, we'll go to Dan, and then we'll alternate back and forth on questions. Patty, could you read the first question, please?
Sure. So this question is, does question 1 raise taxes only on earned income over $1 million? Or would people selling homes and houses over $1 million also pay the increased tax in the year that they did that on the amount of the proceeds over $1 million?
So short answer is yes, right? Because the way this is written, it captures all of your income in any given year globally. So whatever your W-2 is, whatever you make on your investments, whatever you make on the sale of that home that year would all be counted and fall to the bottom line. And then you would be subject to this tax if you fell into that bracket. So yes, which is why we say homeowners and why we say small business owners, because if you sold your business the year you retired, and then that would all fall to the bottom line as well. So short answer, yes, absolutely.
Okay. Liz?
I love this question. So I'm a social worker. I don't know a lot about taxes, but what I've learned is that when you sell your primary residence, you only pay on the gain. And so, yes, you would be paying on that gain. Additionally, you can take $500,000 deduction off when you sell your primary residence. And also, as a homeowner, I know that we have a lot of costs that we have to pay: a new roof, a new furnace, redoing the kitchen, if the driveway falls apart. Those are all things that you can deduct if you own your home for a long time. So what I tell voters when I talk to them is, even if you sold your house for $1.5 million, you're not very likely to sell this after you do all those deductions. And unless, I always explain to them, unless of course you have a second home on Martha's Vineyard worth $3 million, in that case, yes, you are absolutely going to pay this tax. And we believe that you can afford to pay a little bit more to give back to the community that has helped you be so successful. So certainly some people will pay this tax, but our data indicates it'll be less than 1% of sellers. Thank you, Carrie.
Okay, Patty?
Okay, so this is a question, and that question, by the way, came in from folks that I don't know who it was from, so that's why I didn't say who it was from, because we had solicited questions when we sent out the advertisement for this. So, but the next question is from Nancy Brumback. Why do changes in the income tax rate require a constitutional amendment instead of just a law?
Okay. So we'll go back. We'll start, Liz. We're going to alternate. So you'll have 1 minute.
Okay, thank you for the question. As far as I understand it, and I always tell people to double check what I say because I'm not a tax expert, but that our in our Constitution, Massachusetts has decided a long time ago to have a flat tax rate for income tax. And so we currently all pay 5% income tax. And so in order to change that, it had to be a constitutional amendment. It couldn't go any other way without changing the Constitution to add the additional tax. And so that's my understanding of why it's a constitutional amendment.
Yeah, and that's absolutely, yeah, that's absolutely right. Back to John Adams writing that we in Massachusetts will have a flat tax. I will say, Patty, since 1962, the voters of Massachusetts have had the opportunity 5 different times to change this structure, and it's been voted down at least 2 to 1 each of those 5 times.
I will say that the league has always supported a graduated income tax, and we are well aware of the history, Dan, and you are correct. Thank you. Patty, next question.
Okay, so the next question is from an anonymous attendee. What guarantee do we have that the additional funding will actually go toward education and transportation?
Okay, Dan, we'll start with you.
Sure. And we have every guarantee that the funding that is generated by this tax hike amendment will go to education and transportation. Liz and I absolutely agree there. And we also agree that increased educational funding, increased transportational funding are noble causes and should be pursued without question. I drive down the Mass Pike, it takes me an hour and a half to get to work, it takes me 25 minutes to get home. I'd love to have that be different, and I'd love to have that change. But what it doesn't guarantee is that the funding will increase. So subject to appropriation, I only have a minute, Carrie, I get it, right? But means that we go back to our founding fathers. The legislature is the only group that can appropriate funds here in the Commonwealth in our bicameral system. The House appropriates, the Senate agrees, the governor signs it. We have a budget, and they decide what the funding levels are going to be for transportation and education relative to the needs as they assess it. As more tax money comes in, it'll go into those two tranches. And then as it funds up to where they've appropriated, any monies that go above and beyond that or are allocated to that will go back into the general fund and be allocated any way, shape, or form that the legislature sees fit. So it will not increase, but these monies will go, the monies generated by this tax will go to education and transportation, yes.
Okay. Thank you, Dan. And Liz, you'll have 1 minute and 28 seconds if you need it to respond. Thank you.
So yeah, I'm glad we're in agreement that education and transportation are where these funds are going to go. And for me, I don't have any reason to believe they won't go. This will not add revenue. Our political leaders have passed this twice in the State House and a constitutional convention, and I don't know why they would do that if they didn't believe that they needed additional revenue for education and transportation. Additionally, what I tell voters is we have a coalition of over 350 organizations. We have the Mass Teachers Association's been knocking on doors like crazy all summer, devoting their volunteer time to do this. And if they didn't believe that this was going to increase money for education, they would not be spending the money that they are and the volunteer time that they are to do this. The last point I make when I talk to voters is we absolutely 100% will not get extra revenue for education and transportation if this does not pass. We will not. We have a fighting chance if it does. I ask voters, give me that fighting chance. Give me that fighting chance. And Quincy, that I'm going to fight after November 8th to make sure that our public education and our public transit gets a chance to make sure that revenue goes where it's supposed to go, where it's intended to go, where our coalition is fighting for it to go. If you vote no, we're out of the fight. We don't even get a chance. So that's what I'm asking of you is vote yes and give us a fighting chance.
Time. Thank you. Patty?
Okay, we have a lot of questions about selling your home. So Rich Boulay says, I'm confused. If you sell a home, is it the entire proceeds of the sale or is it just the gain that is taxed? And then the second part, and do you get to take the $500,000 deduction allowed under the federal tax law?
Okay, Dan, we'll start with you. You'll have 1 minute.
No, I think it's Liz, but I'll start if you want. Was it supposed to be you, Liz? That's fine. I am not a tax attorney, nor am I going to give out tax advice here in this forum. But yes, it's relative to gains, there are a number of residents in the Commonwealth who bought their home in the 70s and 80s and have owned it now and paid down their mortgage for 30 years, and we've seen the value in home values across the Commonwealth skyrocket. And as folks are trying to buy homes, they know there's not much out there to buy because the stock is so low and the values are so high, and they're only going to go up from there. So yes, you are allowed to take a one-time exemption. You are out once, correct? So if you own a house here and you own a house in the Cape or something like that or wherever, you decide which one it is. If you want to downsize and you decide that is your nest egg, the vast majority of residents in the Commonwealth, their greatest asset, without questions, in the high 90%, is the equity within their homes. And if you know, I'm from Brighton. I was in a show the other day in Cambridge. You throw a rock around any house around you, and they're going to be over. There's not a house in Cambridge that's under $1 million these days, and those are only going to go up from there. And it's creeping across the entire Commonwealth. So yes, it's 1 in 5 or 1 in 7 were sold last year, but they're only going to go up, and they're only going to hit people there. Yes, and last thing I will say, 50.5% of those captured by this tax each year, it will be the one time in their life that it occurs. Those people do not consider themselves millionaires.
Thank you. Okay, Liz, you'll have 1 minute and 39 seconds if you need it.
Thanks for keeping time, Carrie. I appreciate it. And you know, what I love about Cambridge, I work in Cambridge, my regular job, is they are supporting question 1. Even though it will affect many of them, they are still supporting it because they believe that public education and public transit are where we need to invest our money. And they're willing to pay a little bit more when they go to sell their home to make sure that they are contributing to their communities. And I've talked to a lot of people who make over $1 million who want to give back. They are philanthropic, they give to charities, and they know there's no greater way to contribute to their community than public service. So yes, if they sell their home and it's, you know, they pay taxes on the gain, and then they take the $500,000 and then they take off any renovations or work they've done on their home. There are some people that will still, combined with their income, hit that $1 million threshold. And just a reminder, they will only pay the additional 4% tax on every dollar over $1 million. So if that combined equals $1.1 million, they would only pay an additional $4,000 that year. So it's really not a lot of money unless you're selling a multi-million-dollar home and it's not your primary residence. And we know that that's the folks that can afford to pay a little bit more one time, and that 99% of us are just not going to hit that threshold. And it's only 0.6% of the Massachusetts population that's going to be affected by this new tax.
Okay, thank you. Patty, do we have another question?
Yes, so we're turning now to the applicability of this tax to inheritances. In the against statement in the Secretary of State documentation, it states that this tax applies to inheritances as inheritances are income, but it is my understanding that inheritances are not income. As a follow-up, does this tax apply to estate taxes? I think that's 2 different things. I guess the main part of the question is, are inheritances taxable with this tax?
Okay. Okay, Liz, we'll go to you with that one.
I don't know. I don't have the answer to that. So this is definitely not my area of expertise. And if there's other thoughts, people can.
I'm gonna throw a life raft into Liz too, because I'm not a tax attorney either. There are very certain instances where it is. This is not an estate tax. It doesn't affect, quote unquote, the estate tax. So, but there are certain retirements, the way they're structured, if their bolus pays out, payments out, and things like that. But I'm gonna punt on the question along with Liz as not tax specialist on this question.
No, and I think that's fair, absolutely. But I think it's a question for listeners may want to consult an attorney or an expert if they have questions, and that's a concern for them before they vote. So thank you both for that.
Right. If an annuity is paid out, then it counts. If you cash in a bunch of stocks, then that counts. But a pure estate being passed down, I don't believe it falls in there. Sorry. Okay. I said I was going to shut up. I'm going to shut up. But.
Okay.
Yeah, so we have one other question from Gary Bolin. Liz mentioned that politicians would never divert this money to something other than what is intended. He said, but am I correct in understanding what Dan said, that although they may not touch this revenue, they may indeed divert money from other areas for education, roads, etc.? Okay,
so we'll start with Dan on that one.
Yes, you are correct in understanding what I said, that Massachusetts is 6th in the nation in educational spending and 3rd in the nation in standardized test scores. We have more of an allocation and efficiency problem within our educational system. We need to learn how to spend better, get it to where it is. There are without question, there are equity issues. We need to address those and work towards that. And I'm all for that. I'd love to spend the $30 million that's being spent on this campaign right now for studies on how we're going to deal with equity, better equity situations in education. I'm all for that. But bottom line is, the legislature, they're charged with viewing and deciding the needs of the Commonwealth and allocating funds. They do that within the budget. They decide what's important and how much they're going to spend, tens of billions of dollars in education and transportation each year, not to mention the $10 billion that's coming down from the infrastructure bill this year. And then they allocate funds other places where they see fit. As these funds come in, they'll fund up to the levels that they've allocated. And then once it's above that, they've reached the level they allocate and appropriate. Those monies go back into the general fund. Then it's up to the legislature to allocate them, or as we saw this year, to give back to the Commonwealth when it trips Chapter 62 and all of that. So I'm done there, Kerry.
Okay, thank you. Liz?
This question is why I love the League of Women Voters, because although technically it is up to the state elected officials to decide where the budget goes, we're their boss. We as constituents are the ones that actually call the shots on where we think this money should go. And I love civic engagement and being able to say, they put the money where we tell them to put the money. And I know that I'm not naive. It doesn't always work that way, but we have a responsibility to hold them accountable for ensuring that this revenue is not replacing any money that they already have, but is adding new revenue to education and transportation. That's on us as constituents, as voters, as members of our community, to talk to our state reps, to talk to our state senators as the budget process is unfolding and say, how do we see this changes in our communities? What is this going to look like in Quincy? What is this going to look like in New Bedford? What's this going to look like in Lawrence? How are we going to see these changes in our community and make sure that they are investing this money in a way that we have collectively come together to say it has to go there? And so I'm excited to be part of that process. And I know that our coalition is not going to stop when this election happens. Make sure that we continue that advocacy.
Thank you. Okay, Patty, was that the last audience question?
Yeah, I'm just looking through. All right, so I think we've answered everything. There's a couple of similar. Okay, so Pat Clifford asks, how much money will this new tax actually generate? Did you guys already go over that? I'm sure. Sorry if you did, but that's the question.
Okay, so why don't I go to Liz and then to Dan. If you don't agree with the numbers, I'm happy to. So we'll start with you, Liz.
All right, let's see if we agree, Dan. So the estimates that I've seen are between $1.2 billion and $2 billion a year. And part of that range is dependent on how creative millionaires and billionaires are with the loopholes and ways to kind of get out of paying this tax. But even if it's the low number of $1.2 billion a year, we still believe this could have a tremendous impact on our educational system. And as a mom of kids in the educational system, I do think we do an excellent job, to Dan's point earlier, of being an excellent provider of public education. I personally wouldn't base that on MCAS scores. As we know, standardized testing is really not an equitable way of assessing students' learning. But I do think that we have room for improvement in areas of social emotional learning. Our students who come from different racial, ethnic backgrounds, as well as linguistic backgrounds, I think we have a lot of room for improvement where that achievement gap is showing up for us.
Thank you. Dan?
Sure, and I think the range is probably about right. I'm not going to argue with the range, but the reason for the range is more something we need to consider, because it's based upon capital gains, which we would then, in this instance, have the highest short-term capital gains in the nation. It's based upon sale of businesses, sales of homes, things of that nature, which fluctuate wildly from year to year. We look at the tax rolls and the taxes that came in 2000 versus 2001, they were tremendously different. In 2007 versus 2008, economy crashed, tax rolls way down, a lot less capital gains, people not selling things and doing that in that nature because of the nature of the economy. And then therefore this money is not able to be relied upon to that nature and to where that is. I will say that millionaires and billionaires probably won't be affected because they spend countless amounts of money on tax preparation, tax planning, many of them already domicile out of the state. So those that are going to be affected are those that are going to stay behind that own a small business or that sell a home that can't leave Massachusetts and go to Palm Beach and pay zero state aid.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, we're coming near to the end of our forum, and at this point in time, we're going to give each of our speakers, I'm going to be a little more generous and say that you can have 90 seconds. We started with Dan, so we're going to start with Liz and move to Dan. Okay, Liz?
Thank you, Carrie. So thank you all again for hosting this. And I'm sure that many of you have a million things going on in your lives right now. And to spend this time with us is really a gift. So thank you for taking time to consider both sides. And I hope for your yes vote. We are confident and excited to have the support of unions across the state. Working people have donated their money to make sure that we get this across the finish line. After all these tries to have a more progressive tax system in Massachusetts, we're really excited to get this win on November 8th and make sure that our communities are more equitable, have more justice within them, and we have more climate-friendly options for public transit. I hope you can join me in the fight. If you vote yes, know that I will fight for you, and many members of our coalition are going to fight to make sure that our communities have what they need to succeed, and our students, our young people who are struggling so much these days, have all the supports they need to be able to thrive as they enter society. So I invite you to vote yes on question 1 on November 8th, and thank you again for your time.
Okay, thank you. Dan?
Thank you, Carrie, and thank you to the League. I truly appreciate this time that you've offered us here tonight, and I'm willing to come back and talk more. I think that we all benefit from great discourse like this, and I want to thank Liz for proving once again that we all can disagree without this being disagreeable. I completely agree and wholeheartedly will push for increased transportation funding, for increased educational spending here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. They're noble endeavors. It's who we are. We are the state we are because we are an educated workforce, because of how we take care of our children in our public schools, and because of the roads and bridges that people who work in this Commonwealth in eds and meds and things of that nature and biotech can get to their jobs. And we have to ensure that that infrastructure is strong. Unfortunately, this ballot amendment does not do that. There is zero guarantee to increase funding. It will not happen. Therefore, we're left with a measure that each year is going to affect half the people who are captured by it the only time in their life. 77% of those captured by this each year, it'll only happen twice. We're talking about people that work hard, pay their mortgage, sell their house, downsize, pass that money down to their children, or retire on it. People that have a small business that work each year. We didn't even talk about 1120Ss and LLCs that are going to be affected by this each year. But then when they go to sell it at the end of their career, they're going to be taxed 80% more. I asked you to vote no, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you. And again, on behalf of the Boston League of Women Voters and the State League, I want to thank our two panelists for taking the time here tonight to give us all some food for thought. And listening to this and hearing Dan's comment, we can disagree but not have to be disagreeable. And I think the fact that we are a commonwealth and not a state sometimes gets lost. But I think it really speaks, in my opinion, to the philosophy we have here in Massachusetts. I want to certainly urge our voters to vote. The deadline is coming up for that. I would also urge you to use the League of Women Voters resource, Vote 411. It has a wealth of information about voting, the ballot questions, etc. It is a service that the League provides to the citizens of the Commonwealth, and we urge you to take advantage of that. And now I'd like to turn it over to Patty Comfort if she had any closing comments from the State League.
Thank you, Carrie. I just want to add my thanks to Liz and Dan and Robin for wonderful dialogue, and Carrie, even with the tech issues, you did a great job moderating. So we're thrilled about that. And I think we had about 85 people in the conversation. So thank you so much, all of you, for joining us.
And Patty, it will be available. Where can people see this?
Yeah, so the recording, we'll have the recording available tomorrow. It'll be up on our website. We have a election 2022 toolkit, so it'll be in that space, and it will also be uploaded to Vote 411. So when you go to look at your ballot, you'll be able to look and see and listen to this recording.
Okay, thank you very much. And again, we'll leave you with the sentiment that voting is not a spectator sport. It requires active participation. Thank you all again. Good evening.
Bye.